Hey, well, welcome to another edition of Show Up Central Oregon. And I'm Matt Hand. And joining me today, I am extremely excited to talk about business culture and other things. Yes, the subject is leaning in, but leaning in is incredibly important. So, Diane Murray Fleck, good morning. Actually, it's not morning, it's afternoon, isn't it, Diane?
It is. I know the days blend together. It's hard to know what time of day or even what day it is, but I will confirm for you, Matt, it is Wednesday afternoon right
But it's a day ending in Y. Is that correct?
now. So you're on it. Yeah.
Okay, good. As long as it's a day ending in Y, that's my running joke here. So, Diane, I wanted to get you on today to talk about a little bit about business. And obviously, I know right now business is really up in the air. So, you have small business owners, you have large business owners, you have business owners that aren't even employed or employing other people. So I
Mhm.
wanted to talk a little bit about this leaning in process during this time. So I guess let's talk about those for those businesses that are currently still have employees and are looking at, what does it look like for the next few months? What would you encourage, I guess, business owners to do in these times from a business management standpoint?
Well, there's a couple things that come to mind for me, and one is that at this point of uncertainty and shifting landscape, we don't really get a free pass that some people are leaders and some people aren't. We don't get to say that, oh, well, they were just born to lead and I wasn't. The gift, if there are any gifts to this uncertain time, is that we all have an opportunity to lead, and you're either leading or you're choosing not to. And right now, we can't afford to choose not to. So I think some of the myths around leadership that some people are born to just be followers need to kind of be talked about, because this is a chance to delegate. It's a chance to look at the skill sets on your team and see if people can lean in more and if you can grow other people's leadership right now. I think working with leaders in my consulting firm, a lot of them are saying, I need to micromanage all of this. This is so frightening that I need to have my hand in everything, and I have to be kind of helicoptering. And the truth is, we have to do the opposite. We have to release our grip a bit and trust our team, be open and vulnerable to the uncertainty that we have, and invite them in to do more than their job description, invite them in to grow their own leadership and grow themselves.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit. Obviously, this comes from some very specific training that you have gone through, and obviously you've also led your life this way, I'm sure. But it's just what I've found is most people that have gone to the training and have gravitated towards the training that you've done have sort of have that intrinsically in themselves. So just kind of, can you give me a little background on, just to set the stage a little bit on, the training that you've gone through, and what you love to do?
Yeah, well, I've been a coach for over 12 years, but in the last year, I've been trained in Dare to Lead, which is Brene Brown's work. A lot of people know her from her TED Talks and her Dare to Lead program. And I had the opportunity to train with her in her Dare to Lead program, which is really the last 10 years of her study in what makes courageous leaders, and what are some of the myths around being a great leader. And what I found really profound about training with her is that she's able to really blend science and data with some of the aspects of leadership that we would kind of maybe put in the quadrant of soft skills. Um, and anecdotally, I have known that emotional intelligence and being vulnerable and growing others' leadership was critical to great leaders. But she brings the science and the data and the grounded theory to kind of legitimize it, back it up.
Mm-hmm.
And I find the program pulls in people that might be more data and research based, and kind of pleads the case for this self development isn't just an offshoot or something to do in your spare time. This emotional intelligence and the developing of your own personal leadership is absolutely critical. And I think we can all agree that we need courageous leaders now more than ever. So working on yourself, your own leaderships, what has brought you to leadership, how it defines you, is really an amazing asset to have at this time. And there are observable, teachable, measurable skill sets that courageous leaders have. And I think that's really rewarding to know that you can have a tool belt for these times.
Yeah, and so one of the questions, honestly, I have, Diane, is it, it doesn't come naturally, and I know Brene has spoken this about this a lot. She speaks, and people are like, "Well, can you tell us about this, or can you tell us about this?" And she's like, "Well, you got to start. We got to start talking about this." This whole
Mm-hmm.
sort of vulnerability thing,
Yeah,
I is incredibly difficult for a lot of people. And
yeah.
can you give like a couple of tips on where that starts from and how to become more vulnerable as a leader?
Yeah, and that's the first question that I get when working with leaders is, okay, so how can I get vulnerability to happen? How can I orchestrate it? I'm totally bought in that vulnerability needs to happen. So how can I just get my team to be vulnerable so we can kind of check this off the list?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, check.
um,
We got it. We see
we
it's
did
checked off. Yep.
vulnerability. We're over it. Let's get back to productivity. Yeah. And I get the feeling of wanting it. And I know that feeling because I'm type A as well. Like I love to check boxes. I love to get things done. But vulnerability is one of those ongoing things that's never over. And it's a slippery skill set because what's vulnerable for me is different for you. So knowing when you're being vulnerable and calling it courage and creating a culture on your team where armoring up isn't even needed, that we can just be real and authentic with each other, um, is critical. And leaders who wanna, I even had one leader that said, I tried it. I tried to get my team to be vulnerable at a meeting and nobody would go for it. You can't really just like introduce vulnerability that's never existed and say, now do this. If you really want to see vulnerability on your team, it has to start with you doing it, practicing it,
Hmm.
knowing what it is and isn't, um, and showing the way by being an example of it. And this is a time when we desperately need vulnerability. Um, and we need it from our leaders first, and the team will follow if they feel it's safe. But the truth is, we armor up for a lot of really intelligent reasons.
Hmm.
If we show up at work and it's not safe to be vulnerable, then we shouldn't do it. But as leaders, we get a chance to show this other side, to show that we don't have all the answers, that this is an ongoing situation, and some days we have data, and then other days it changes, and expressing how hard that is. Um, we really have to be the guide for it and trust that if we do it enough and there's no negative consequences for it and it's rewarded, our team will naturally follow. But when leaders tell me they want to like force or manufacture vulnerability, that's a huge red flag for me, um, because I don't think employees should do vulnerability or express it or expose themselves if it isn't a culture that's safe for that.
Yeah, I would. Safety, I think, is the most important key word there. I think that
Yeah.
there's a lot of cultures that are not necessarily safe to have vulnerability. You can't. It's just like a good healthy relationship. If you don't have the vulnerability, if you don't have that ability to be vulnerable in those relationships, then practicing that vulnerability is not. It's not really healthy for either individual. So
No,
building.
it's going to backfire,
Yeah.
and it's actually quite damaging to be vulnerable with someone that can't handle it or where there's a negative consequence. Later on, you get whatever you were vulnerable about gets thrown in your face. Like that stings. So I would say first step is that leaders need to do this work themselves, know the myths of vulnerability, know what it is and isn't. And then you need to try it with two or three people that have earned the right to hear your vulnerability. So you don't go from doing this internal work to speaking to 200 of your teammates and being vulnerable. You go from the internal work getting clear on vulnerability for yourself, and then you branch out to 3 or 4 people that are your trusted tribe, and you're vulnerable with them, and typically that's successful because you've handpicked them. And then slowly you start to build a culture where that's allowed, rewarded, and celebrated, and others follow.
Yeah, and what is that? I mean, if you were to say, sort of, give people watching, what it feels, if you could describe the feeling of being completely vulnerable,
Yeah,
what does that actually look like?
it's absolutely horrible. It's a nightmare. It's a total nightmare. And that, I think that's the other thing too, is that people want to feel that it's like in the movies, like soft music in the background, people making full eye contact, safe bubble, and you reveal something hard and they accept it beautifully and you're closer than ever. The truth is, vulnerability shows up in a very physiological way in all of us. It's different for me than it is for you. I will say for me, I start sweating, my hands shake, my heart is pounding. There's a feeling of wanting to leave myself. And when all those things start to happen and I kind of note them, I know I'm heading into sharing something vulnerable, sharing my heart, sharing a risky piece of information. And I get to make that decision about whether I'm going to be vulnerable in that moment, or whether maybe I don't feel safe enough to do that. But that's one of the key components of courageous leadership, is knowing what vulnerability feels like in your body. Because when we armor up, we're really in protection mode,
Mm-hmm.
and we've sort of left our body. We're going way in our head, and we're thinking, I just need to get out of this situation as safely as possible, protecting my heart. And I'm going to maybe move out of my integrity to just get through it. And the number one aspect that's going to pull you out of integrity is going to be a feeling of shame. And the number one shame trigger regarding work is a fear of being invaluable, a fear of your work being irrelevant. And we're all swimming in that.
Mm-hmm.
Does my work even matter? I just lost my job. Now who am I? I'm busier than ever on the front lines of this COVID situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I'm failing it. Like we're all kind of swimming in that. I don't know if I'm worthy now.
Right.
Who am I in this situation? And so that's why we're all in kind of collective vulnerability right now. And we all are kind of recalibrating, what's my value, what's my space in this pandemic.
Yeah, and I think, at least I know on a personal level, that vulnerability, you have to actually do some self work on, as far as where you talk about the shame triggers. Those triggers come from, because the reality is you may walk into a situation desiring to be vulnerable, and yet somebody hits one of those triggers inadvertently,
Yep.
and that sends you into a spiral, and you just aren't capable of being that true vulnerability, because your own walls then go up at that point in time. So
Yeah.
I think, and it's a reminder of, in today's age, that we just need to be okay with not being okay. I mean, you talked about
Yeah.
that. You talked about that. I mean, that is really our reality today. It's, like we talked about it last week. I mean, the messiness, or a couple of weeks ago, the messiness of homeschooling, and as a frontline individual, you're not going to have all the answers, or even as a business leader, you're not going to have all the answers. And sometimes admitting that you don't have the answers, actually most of the time, admitting you don't have the answers and coming back and saying, okay, we'll talk about this and I'll try to figure it out, is better than just, I don't know, making something up in the moment, I guess.
I completely agree, because I think that's one of the myths of leadership, that leaders should always have the answers.
Yeah.
That you're paid to have the answers, that you're in that role and you have those special letters after your name,
Mm-hmm.
and you should always have the answer. And the truth is, in this situation, the answers are changing every 3 to 5 minutes.
Right.
So claiming you have the answers and the solutions is actually going to fracture some pretty significant trust on your team because you don't have all the answers. And when we talk about kind of courageous trust and courageous cultures, those cultures speak the truth even when the truth is hard. And so you as a leader saying, listen, I've never done a pandemic before, neither have you. I don't have all the answers. Here are some of my thoughts. But what I can commit to, see, the greatest teams that I work with, what the leaders have said now during this pandemic is, what I can commit to you is keeping channels of communication wide open, and you won't know anything that I will share everything I know with you. So there aren't going to be any secrets. I'm not going to have any backdoor meetings. You will know exactly what I know as soon as I can share it. Let me tell you, the level of trust on those teams is huge. They actually don't need certainty, but they do need the truth. And I think we get confused about that as leaders. We think our teams need certainty and correctness and rightness, and they don't. They just need honesty, and they need to know they can trust you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the way to do that is to say, I don't know. I don't know the answers right now. We'll figure them out together. And the other piece is, I talked a little bit about delegating and loosening your grip a little bit, which is so hard to do when you're in collective trauma. But I am a big believer that the people closest to the work have the solutions and the answers to some of our hardest problems. So the people that you work with, open things up to them, because if they're closer to the work than you are, because maybe your leadership is more visionary, they may have answers and solutions that are blind spots for you. And they want to feel useful too. So open that up for asking for more opinions, thoughts, brainstorming, solutions from the people closest to the issues or challenges that you're facing.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything you'd add? I mean, we got a couple minutes left, but anything else you want to just make sure that you impart to leaders during these difficult times?
Yeah, I think that a lot of times I'll hear from leaders that they don't have the time to tend to the feelings and emotions that are coming up. And the truth is, you're either going to spend time on those emotions that your staff and your team are feeling and what they're going through, or you're going to spend an inordinate amount of time with unproductive behavior and people not being all in. So you get to kind of pick your poison, so to speak. You can either on the front end devote some time to how they're doing in their well-being, or you can spend a ton more time dealing with unproductive behaviors or people kind of checked out and half in. And I would really encourage leaders to devote time to their team's well-being emotionally, because it will build trust, it will increase the productivity, and you'll get the right work done together.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan, for joining me today. I appreciate it very much.
Matt.
Yeah. This is, it's always a great conversation to have. I thoroughly enjoy talking business culture. It's one of my big things that I'm like, oh, can we talk about that more and more and more and more? So I certainly appreciate you joining me. Thank you, Diane, again.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. That's a wrap on this episode. Coming up, I'm going to have Sherry Helt, but I'm going to take a break real quick, reset, and then Sherry's going to join me here in a second. So thanks all for joining me. And remember, show up for Central Oregon.